because I just started a refactor and started writing out some comments because yeah, I had to decide between talking about how it currently is done and talk about how I want to do it in the very near future. And
but just from a show of hand, how many of us have some concept of the internals of Makie already? I think half, maybe. Yeah. Okay. Hi, Julius. Okay, I'll mute myself.
Julius just comes in time for the little presentation I gave him basically yesterday. Nice. Can everyone read this?
Yep.
Okay, so yeah, I want to talk about what was basically a bit messy in Makie and what I want to clean up. And the biggest mess is that we have like these entry points like plot and scatter, which cover a huge range of functionality. Like you would be able to pass in camera attributes to scatter, you would be able to pass in the scene resolution and things like that. And since everything can be an observable, all of the arguments and attributes, that created a huge mess. So the implementation for actually figuring out where the attributes need to go and then creating a plot type from it is super messy and ugly. I don't know if anyone ever looked into interfaces.jl. That's where this mainly happens in the pipeline. You have like pretty obscure code in here that I probably don't even understand anymore. Where I try to figure out from the observables what kind of plot type it becomes, but then I have to also convert it with convert arguments, and it's just really messy. So the plan is to kind of get rid of this kind of API where you can just like throw in all attributes into the same function call and instead do something more like this, where you actually always just give the attributes to where they belong and where they actually are supposed to end up, so that I can get rid of this whole logic which tries to be way too smart.
It's actually fairly similar to the way ggplot2 does it in R.
I guess, yeah, other plotting libraries have something like that. And the major point here is that would give us a pretty clean internal API that doesn't try to do that much magic anymore and is easier to understand for everyone who wants to actually start working on the internals. But the smart lazy API is still open, right? So if we start to creating types that are actually uppercase, then we still have like the lowercase function version for our smart API that does lots of magic things. So there's no need to actually get rid of that. I just want to separate it more cleanly so that you can isolate all this magical figuring out where attributes go and where to apply conversions and just have them at the right place.
So it's magic at the surface, but then stops being magic just below.
Yeah. Yeah, it isolates the magic to like one part of the system that is then better to manage, I think. Right now it's like mixed in everywhere. There's like a bit of magic there, and then there's a bit of figuring and guessing there, and it's just a big mess. Yeah, and one big part of this pipeline was the convert arguments function, which was always applied to all positional arguments of any plotting function. And then because it can also be observables, it was first transformed to observables, and then inside the convert arguments was applied. which was also a bit messy. And I want to move away from that a bit, and maybe call it translate or render. I don't know. I haven't decided on the name yet, but let's say we call it translate. Although translate is pretty confusing, I figured out, because especially in plotting, you also want to translate things spatially, right? So that's probably a pretty bad name, but yeah, I would call it like that for now. So that's how I want to do it in the future, that you in this convert translate function, that you can just return any kind of plot or higher level type that you can construct. So you can also return a layout or maybe even a new scene that would then just be a subscene and make open up a new window, like a pop-up or something like that. So you can also implement pop-ups in recipe, and that would be the main recipe interface.
What would be, where would the attributes be in context?
In context? So attributes, forwarding attributes. I think I want to keep things always at the place where they belong, and always just one argument, so that it's really easy to write these kind of translations and not need to use var args and things like that. So how to get attributes in there that forward, for example, if you want to color the histogram here, you see that right now this actually doesn't forward them here because you can't actually give it a color. We need to figure this out a bit more, but one idea would be to just have like a plot wrapper that then just calls translate on the argument to the plot, fills in the theme that it got from the attributes here, and then returns that. So then you can do something like this, and it should come out all right. But then, of course, you need to figure out how to give it different attributes per default, right? For the histogram.
So does this make it hard for us is this so early that it makes it harder for us to actually implement the Makie recipes at this point?
For the Makie recipes, I want to use like the syntax that doesn't really change the API, like the normal scatter, plot, lowercase function API. That should stay, right? So I hope this shouldn't actually change.
But what about convert arguments?
I don't think you actually interact with convert arguments then with that kind of syntax, right? If you just call the higher level Makie API inside the recipe to build up a plot, you're not really touching the convert arguments, right?
Okay, yeah, so let's talk about the recipes later in that discussion.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a good point. But I hope that they're like, that we can build them upon the stable API, basically. Yeah, so there are still a few open things, how to actually now give this like a, I guess you would need to make your own plot type, a histogram plot type, which we also already have, like with the type recipes, I guess they're called. No, probably exactly the opposite, right? That you give it a custom theme.
I ask a question right now. Just for my understanding, are you going to move to a kind of nested structure where you have a common set of arguments which you can override at any level of your, at any depth of your structure? or did I misunderstand what you are going to change?
So nested sounds about right. What's with the argument?
Will you have a common set of keyword arguments through all your levels, or will you have specific keyword arguments at each level?
The levels are defined by like the
nesting level.
By the types that you actually create, right? Do I have an example? Let's see. Well, somewhere I had it. I guess I don't have it anymore. So you would then have like something like that somewhere, right? And that would then define the keyword arguments that you have available. And that's also how you would probably make a histogram one that then is not the stat space histogram anymore, but then you would just return basically this, I guess. And then you can also have a custom theme for that, if that makes sense.
That's what we call a series recipe in plots, more or less. So what a series recipe does in plots is that both it can specify some default attributes, and it can also do some transformation on the arguments.
Yeah. So that's a series recipe equivalent then. So this will not create like a histogram magic function anymore that accepts like resolution and everything. This will instead create a new type that just has a constructor with those keyword arguments that you can have with default values.
So is this a refactor, or is it a complete re-implementation of the package?
I would say it's a refactor. I mean, I hope I can restrict this to mainly rewriting these 10 functions or something. Here, they should be mainly changed. And then I would just pretty much leave in the higher level API. Yeah, but definitely it's a bigger refactor. But I feel like that's the best way forward. Of course, I'm open to feedback, and I definitely need feedback because it's always hard to predict how these kind of new ideas play out in all different kind of contexts. So what I actually want to do in the next days is I want to try out this concept with different recipes and see if it works out, or if I run into things that are super complicated to express.
One question. Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
So how do you plan, if every plotting object basically has its own keywords that it stores in its own attribute dict or something? Do you have a plan already how an object should inherit certain keywords from, I don't know, some upper level object, maybe the scene, or maybe could be another object even. So I think in plots, you always have this, like every keyword argument is basically, should only exist once, as far as I understand correctly. So there should never be two keyword arguments of the same name that do different things, because basically the whole pipeline just carries one huge dictionary, and then every series recipe can basically look up in that dictionary whether a value is already defined. No?
Yeah.
No, not really. So every single in plots, every series has its own attributes. That's, if you have many series, you can get really heavy objects in plots, and that's one of the things that sometimes slows things down. But there is a processing pipeline where but Daniel is going to talk about that in just a second. But there is a processing pipeline where you first process all the input recipes, and then after that you have the default attributes, and they sort of percolate down. so that each series is then populated with all the attributes that haven't been specified. And and there you can, when that happens, when you have this process where the attributes are applied from sort of that basic the plot attributes thing, there's a specification whether it should override or not override. And then after that happens, you run the series recipe that can actually again change some of these plot attributes, so that each series can have different attributes. And it's extremely important to do that, to be able to build complicated plots. So let's say, for instance, that you have a plot that creates a colored line, or a colored line and a box, right? So you specified one series type, but the result of it is a colored line and a box. Then you want to say, okay, this colored line should look up into this color map, but the box should always be black. So you need to be able to say that for the box we override what the user inputs, because it should only be apply where it does apply. And it's exactly this relationship between the attributes of individual objects and what's being said in recipes and what's being put in by the user, and what the attributes of the whole plot. That's the thing that allows actually the power of the recipes to work. I think it's probably a little bit wasteful to necessarily copy it every single time. I think that could probably have done in a nicer way, but that's the way it's done.
Okay, so maybe
what did you mean by inheriting?
Yeah, let me
like...
maybe clarify that a little bit, because so what I was wondering about is, let's say you have one plot object, it's called, or one series type. So we have scatter and maybe we have histogram. So just like your examples were, and then both of them use a main color. Let's just call it color. So as far as I understand, let's say you don't force this to be a certain value for either of these types, so it needs to be inherited. And as far as I understand, in plots, that means it's looking for a keyword called color. And if there's one, then it will take that value. But what I find hard about that is that basically then everybody has to agree on a set of keywords, and you cannot use a color keyword in some plot where you don't want it to mean the same thing as color in everybody else's recipes, right? So I was wondering whether you can, regarding theming, whether we need a system where, like CSS, you can qualify all these things where you say like, well, I want to theme all objects of type scatter with their keyword color in this certain way, but this doesn't affect any other plot that has a color keyword, right? Because
so that's exactly the plan. I came up with this new attributes type that holds the attributes of a plot. And that has a set of supported fields so that we can give proper errors when you try to construct it with fields that are not supported. Then it has the attributes that come directly from the user when they created it. And then you have like a dictionary that you can fill with from a global theme or from wherever, right? From the rest of the pipeline. So when you, for example, have this scatter thing the scatter recipe that will translate into something like this. I don't know. And that will already then created with the one from the keywords. It will give the default ones with color to red. So that you have I would call this is like the local theme, which with the lowest priority. And then the highest priority is what the user actually gives it at construction time. And then everything that isn't defined can be filled in by the plotting pipeline, however the plotting pipeline sees fit. So if you leave out the color, then either the plotting pipeline can fill it in from a theme, and hopefully even with something like CSS selectors, or I don't know, right now in Makie.
Can I say something?
So you can have nested specification in a theme. So for example, right now it's possible in Makie to do something like this. So that would always make the color in scatter red.
Can I say something just to interrupt here? So the thing is that we've got lots of different projects to do here, and we're lots of different people.
Yeah.
So the intention here, we've gone really far down a rabbit hole really quickly.
Yeah.
And so the intention was a little bit for us to sort of get everybody on the same page with this is how these packages work. And then I think, so this really belongs to the, it's one of the really important discussions to be had, but it probably belongs to the Makie recipes discussion that we've already taken hold of. So either maybe we should move a little bit ahead and take the recipes, the plots recipes and the stats Makie presentations quickly, and then after that decide how we decide it into groups, and then we can continue this in a group of the people who really want to participate in this discussion. Is that
makes a lot of sense? Yeah, thank you. I didn't want to drag it out too much.
Cool. So does that make? Could you then move on, Daniel?